about as we move further along into talking about the history browser. So first off is our time period. This, again, is the area of the program where we can do all kinds of historical analysis and reports. This is specifically the place that you would need to go to run a spins report. So a lot of folks will ask, well, how do I do a spins report? The history browser is the place, and we'll talk about that specific report and the specific setup that we'll need to generate a 7-day, a 30-day, whatever type of report you want, as well as an individual report for artist or title if we want to break it down that way. So let's start with the time period. We can simply double-click in the time period panel here for first hour, last hour, start with our date range that we want to look at. Let's start, for example purposes here today, looking at the last 7-day period ending today. So let's toggle this back to our calendar icon here, which allows us to then pick whatever date we want to start with, or we can just key it into the box here at the top. So we're going to start with February 19th and an ending date of today, so February 25th. You'll note that as I call up the calendar, today's date is already circled in red. So if we want to click on today's date, which is already circled, or click down below, the result is the same. Time frame, if we want to manipulate those in any way, we can use the drop-down box here to start with a different hour of the day. We can also make this simple for ourselves if we want to by accessing the default box. If instead of trying to think back how many days is 30 days, what is the start date for a 30-day panel that we might want to run, or a 30-day report that we'd want to run, we can use the drop-down in default here and pick the last 30 days by selecting current month, and that will take us back to the last scheduled date at this point is what it's showing. This is the last date that I've scheduled in this database, which is April 7th. But if we want to take it back a week in time, a particular date in time, a particular month in time, we can click in the default box to do that as well. Let me toggle this back to the date that we want to look at here, which is the 19th through February 25th, ending today. Other options that we have available to us, if we want to exclude certain hours from the report that we're about to generate, we can use the excluded hours portion of the screen here. The green bubbles in each one of these hours and days include at this point all of these hours. Now if we want to say, for example, exclude the overnight hours, the hours that we're running syndicated or satellite program, we can do that with left-clicking with our mouse, dragging across and down in this example. I'm going to take the midnight hour to 5:59 hours out of the equation. So I'm going to drag over and down, and then I'm going to hit the delete key on my keyboard to get rid of those hours. So now those hours will not be included in our report. In the reverse, say we only want to look at our overnight hours. In this example, we could click on Invert and flip it the other way, and now just generate a report for the 19th through the 25th with those hours included. So that can be a handy feature as well. I'm going to go ahead and put this back to Select All, so it will include all 24/7 days of the week here. Another option that some folks find helpful is the option to filter right from the start on specific MusicMaster index numbers, i.e. specific songs that are in the database. We can actually put those numbers in the database based on the MusicMaster index number and run a report specifically for those index titles in the database if we wish to do that. Next tab is Categories. We can simply individually click or unclick any of the tabs if we want to include or exclude any categories. In this particular report, I'm going to go ahead and say that we don't want to look at jingles or promos, so I'm going to left-click once on each one of those. Another faster way that I might do this is either with the drop-down box here at the top, which will give us default choices that we can use, entire library, music categories, non-music categories, and rotated music. Now this ties into category groupings, which we could get into a little bit more in depth with your music scheduling consultant. But basically we could set up category groupings that have our current categories included and not our gold or lunar categories included. We could create a category grouping that would also just include the gold and lunars. And so we can very fast then make a selection of the number of categories that we want to include. But just for simplicity's sake, for this time, let's go ahead and we'll just include music categories here. We'll come back to the Filters tab here in just a moment, but I want to talk about the heart of the history browser and the place that we can decide what type of report we want to generate, and that's the display tab. So we'll go ahead and left-click on that and look at the display mode. We have a whole variety of options for generating types of report here in the history browser, and I'll just go down through here briefly, just scroll down through the list so you can see what's here, and then we'll talk about some of these specifically and how we might use a couple of these. So we have everything from individual plays, individual songs, category usage. Then we have artist-specific reports that we can generate. We can generate this by an attribute. Say we want to run a sound, a tempo, or a agenda report. We can do that. Perhaps we want to generate a report for a record label for the last 7 days. So we just want to isolate this out to Warner Brothers Records. We could go ahead and do that as well and look at our 7-day period and only show Warner Brothers record artists for that period if we decide we want to run that type of report. So a lot of different options there. Favorites we'll come back to as well. This will allow us to generate a report once, set it up with all the parameters that we want, and then be able to easily access all of the setup properties in the future. We'll likely want to go through and change the date range. We may want to change some of the properties when we go back into it, but it's going to save us the time of having to go through and set the whole report up once again. How do we generate a historical spins report? The way that we do that in MusicMaster Windows in History Browser is to use the display mode, and we're going to select individual songs. So I'm going to select individual songs, and each time that we select the display mode, you'll see that the options that we have available to us will change. Some of them will appear in all of these boxes. Some of them will only appear in some of them. The thing to know on the display options portion of this is that those are completely configurable by you. You can decide any combination of these that you want to use. You can also go ahead and generate a report and come back into it and fine-tune your criteria a little bit more acutely if you want to do that after you've run this once to see what it looks like. So let's just talk about a couple of these here. In most cases, the song ID is the MusicMaster index number, and in most cases I would say that most folks wouldn't be interested in seeing our internal index numbering system. So let's go ahead and exclude that from this spins report. So we'll go ahead and use the drop-down and say no to that. We do want to go ahead and look at our categories. We want to see that the priority categories are spinning obviously faster than the gold and the lunar categories. So we'll leave that in there so we can kind of see that as well. Runtimes, probably don't care about that in this particular report, but it is an option if you decide you want to include it. Turnovers, I think we definitely want to leave that for now. Depending upon our audience, obviously, we may or may not want to show the turnovers for the library and the categories that we've chosen. Again, that's completely an option to us. We'll leave that for now. Total time, probably don't need to see that, but we probably do want to do a ranked list here. So we will want to show the rank in this individual songs. So we'll go ahead and click yes to that. Total spins, we have an option there of total spins, weekly spins, total and weekly spins. Let's leave it at total spins for now. If we want to fine-tune this report down and only have it show the spins that are maximum of, say, a particular number, say a maximum of 45 spins for this weekly period, we can go ahead and define that we only want to see the spins that have a maximum of 45, none larger than that. Maybe we want to see at least one spin for each one of the reports, each one of these in the report. We can go through in minimum total spins and say, show me everything that has at least one spin. And then down further on, we have extra fields. We can include record label in there. We could include audio automation system numbers if we want to. Any kind of extra field that's available to us in the database, we can display that as well. Zero plays, maybe we want to also see the records that aren't spinning. We want to definitely look to see which ones have zero plays and maybe do a little bit further investigation to see why those aren't particularly spinning. We could say yes or no to that. Then we can title our report if we wish to. We can also choose in our printed report section here whether or not we want a graph to print at the bottom of our actual printed report. So now that we've done that, we've configured it the way that we want. We've configured our time period for a week. We've configured the categories that we want to look at. And we've decided that we want to do a spin report, we can simply left-click and click OK. It's going to take just a couple of seconds here to generate. I will point out that if there's any specific type of report that you feel like you need to generate, either for your consultant, for your general manager, for your own purposes, and you're not able to figure out how to do that, please either call or email your music scheduling consultant, and we'd be more than happy to go through all of the options here and try to figure out the best report for the purposes that you're looking to obtain. So I've generated my 7-day spin report here. It's ranked on spins. I've also got the information about the minimum, maximum, and average turnovers and the deviation between the median and the maximum turnovers. And again, a ranked list that I can decide that I may want to look at a different way. I can click on the column headers here to sort it by artist if I want to look at it that way. Perhaps I want to look at it by spins from least to most. I can just click on the column header and look at this in any way that I wish. Now I'll point out in this area of the program, as well as turnover analysis and in some of the other areas of the program, not only can we use the printed reports that are available to us that have specific, nicely formatted MusicMaster templates already set up for us, we can also take information straight out of MusicMaster windows and copy and paste it into a spreadsheet if we wish. And that's a really simple thing to do. A lot of folks don't know that this is available, but all you have to do to take the information out of the spins report, as an example, would be to use a simple Windows copy and paste. And that's the Control key with the C key to copy that to your clipboard, and then the Control key and the V key to paste it to your clipboard. So you could take this out to Excel, you could take this out to email, you could take this wherever you want, straight out of MusicMaster and into another type of program if you desire. So that's a really cool thing to know, and a lot of folks ask us oftentimes, can we do that, so we can send that information to the consultant, or we can crunch the data in some other place. We'll talk about that in turnover analysis too, that's also an option. On the bottom portion of the report, you'll see that we have, which a lot of you are probably already familiar with, basically a history browser view of each one of these titles. So I've clicked now on the Chuck Berry record here. Let me take this back to rank here so that we can look at this a little bit closer. And say, for example, we want to look at Butte Is Only Skin Deep from the Temptations. If I click on that, it will also show us not only did we have 9 spins for the 7-day period, it's also telling us which day, which hour it played in, and with the colorful pies here, it's telling us what quarter hour the song played in. So that might be hugely helpful to us to make sure that we don't have any rotation issues for this particular song that we might need to address, so we can quickly look at that. Obviously, we can do this outside in library maintenance and call up the history browser, but this is also another option that's available to you while you're running a history browser report. Down in the left-hand corner, not only can we toggle this from the play history by play, which is what I had it set at, I can turn this over to spin density. I can turn this to any of the other options that I have available to us here, spins by hour, spins by date, spins by week, lots of different options, and it's a lot of fun to kind of go through here when you've generated a report to look at the different options and maybe look at the data in a different way. So, maybe for this particular spins report, I'm noticing some deviations or some variations in the category that I might want to look at a little bit further. I can do that with the graph down below. Other things that I can do from this particular graph, if I want to, is actually look at why, for example, a particular record isn't spinning as much as some of the other ones. Let's just scroll down to the bottom here and look at maybe one that's spinning a lot less in the H category as opposed to some of the other ones here. And let's look at Rose Garden, Next Plane in Town. What I can actually do straight from the history browser is use the recap report selection here and actually go ahead and look at the schedule history for Rose Garden and show why this record may or may not have scheduled as much as some of the other records in here. And again, this can lead us into other questions about our data that we might want to look at a little bit further. If I want to save this particular report and use it for some sort of special programming, I can go ahead and just click on it and save it as a song list that will be available to us outside of the program. This might be really helpful if we decide we want to generate a 30-day or, say, a year-long list that we could use for a most frequently played for the year 2009, for example. We could go through and take this down to maybe the first 100 songs in rank and use that list as part of some special programming in a saved list and play the top 100 over and over again as we go into 2010. So that's an option that we could utilize there as well. I mentioned copy. We can go ahead and Windows copy clipboard to another document and paste to another document if we wish. Let's go back now and let's talk about some of the other things that we can do in the setup tabs here. I'm going to go back to click on the display tab and talk about some of the other ways that we might look at the data. We spent a lot of time here so far looking at individual plays, or individual songs. We're going to now look at individual plays, which that display mode choice actually gives us a historical running report for a specified day. So say, for example, we want to recall what we did last 4th of July or last New Year's Eve, or there was a particular issue that a listener had with something that we played on a particular day 3 weeks ago, and we want to go back and recall that. If we have history for it in our schedule editor, we can certainly call it up that way. But if it's something way in the past, it's likely been something that's archived that we'll want to call up in this manner. So we're going to use display mode individual plays to select that. Now again, we have configurations here that we can select as we go through and decide if we want to include or exclude certain things. We're going to go ahead and leave category in. We're going to exclude the runtime. And I'm just going to go ahead and generate this for, as I said, a day in the past. And let's pick the July 4th date as our reference point here. So let's go ahead and I'll toggle this to July 4th. And for the 1-day period here, individual plays. And I'll show you what that looks like. And again, this will take just a couple of seconds to generate. But here is from midnight to 11:59 p.m. the running historical report for that day. So if we need to call up this log and use it again, or look at something specific that we did, or save it as a list because we're going to use some of the hours all over again, we can do that in the history browser with individual songs. Say, for example, we want to run a report that shows us the most used categories ranked with spins and turnover information, an actual list of spins and turnovers for a particular time period. We have a great report that we can use in history browser for that as well. And again, we'll go back to display, and that's going to be our category usage report. Again, we have some setup options here that we can use. I'm going to use turnovers in here for sure. I'm going to exclude total time. I'm going to show rank. And then I'm only going to show perhaps maybe my heart and my soul category in this particular analysis. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And I'm going to also take this back to today's date. And let's take it to today's date back 1 week. So go back to the 19th for a 7-day period. So we'll go ahead and generate that. And this is the category usage report. So then this is giving us, for the 7-day period, the number of spins for both the heart and the soul category, and any sort of turnover information that might be helpful to us is displayed as well. And then it's also giving us here down below, as we've got the second portion set up, the actual number of the times that this song is played in each one of these categories for that time period. So that's displayed as well. Now, say, for example, we want to just make sure that, since these are the most important categories in our database, we want to make sure that we're getting a good representation of the heart and the soul for this time period. We can go ahead and click down in our display mode on the bottom portion here, and this might be kind of interesting to look at. Let's look at spins density as an example. So over the course of this time period, 52.94% of the time, we're using the heart category. 47.06% we're using as the soul category. So if we're looking to kind of just look overall historically, if we're getting a good representation of our library during a particular time period, we can run the category usage report and look at the data not only with the columns up above here, but look at the graph down below and maybe get a little bit deeper knowledge as to what is actually happening with the category for that time period. One other report here that might be interesting to look at, again, kind of getting into the whole idea of what is our library doing as opposed to what we think our library is doing. If we want to run a ranked artist keyword report, we can go ahead and do that. Again, we're going to click on Display, and we're going to click, in this instance, Artist All. And I'm going to show the turnovers. I'm going to not show total time. I am going to show rank. And I'm not going to show the graph here to print, but I want to look at a ranked list, and I'm just going to go ahead this time and say a minimum of at least one spin, and I don't care about the number of maximum spins. And then I'm going to go ahead and just do a 7-day period for that. And look at artist keywords. And you might just think about what are the core artists in our database, and then run this report for a 7-day, a 30-day period, whatever you decide you want to run, and see how close what you think your core artists are as opposed to what is actually happening with the database. So in this particular report here, looking at our oldies database, which is what this basically is, Temptations have 96 spins for the time period, followed closely by Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, so on and so on. So if you've made a list of what you think your core artists are and you find someone down here that's not up there in the top 10, that obviously makes some larger questions that you might want to look at further in some other areas of the software and do a little bit further digging from, from the starting point. So that can be helpful. Other things that we can do in the history browser that you definitely might be worth playing around with and might have instances where you would definitely find this helpful under the display mode. We'll go back to looking at an individual play report this time and say we want to just hyper-focus on a particular artist in the database for a 7 or a 30-day period. So I'm going to go back now to the individual plays mode, and I'm going to again just probably leave my settings as they are at this point. But what I want to do now is talk about the filter capability. So I'm going to click on Filter, and for this particular instance, for this period of time, the 7-day period that I'm still working with here, I want to look at, in the entire active library, just the instances of the 4 tops. And I'm just throwing that out as an example of what an artist we might use here. So we're going to go to Filters, and we're going to select Artist this time as our criteria. Artist Contains, and I can either, if I know exactly how it's been keyed in the database, type in 4 tops, or I can use the drop-down menu and make a selection from the list. So I'm going to go ahead here and select 4 tops and select it and click Add to add it into the criteria. Now, in addition to my 7-day period, in addition to all active categories, and the fact that I want to do an individual song report, I just now want to look at instances of 4 tops for this time period. So now I'll click OK. And here is all of the instances. Actually, let me go back here because I think let me run a ranked report here for you on this. That's the individual plays. I meant to show you individual songs. And let's just make sure that our criteria is correct here. Again, 4 tops, 7-day period, and we'll click OK, which is this is the report that I actually wanted to show you. For a 7-day period, here are the 7-day 4 tops instances in this database ranked by spin, and they're basically all getting 9 spins. So as you see, that's another way that you might want to, from time to time, focus in a little bit closer on the data with the history browser and just look at specific attributes in the database. Perhaps maybe you just want to look at all the soul-coded music in the database. Maybe you want to look again at a specific artist. Maybe you want to sort by tempo. The possibilities are really limitless here. So it's a lot of fun to play around with the history browser and see what's possible. It's a hugely powerful tool and one that I encourage you to play around with. And like I said, if you have further questions about all of the things that you could do with the history browser, please not only spend time with it, but please give a shout to your MusicMaster scheduling consultant, and we can set some time up with you to delve into this further. One thing a lot of people ask about when they set up a spins report and they go through all the work of getting this exactly the way they want, well, how can I save this so that I don't have to go through and set up all this criteria every single time? Well, if you want to do that, all you have to do is go to the Favorites menu. And what the Favorites menu will allow us to do is set our category criteria, set our filter criteria if needed, as well as our display choice. And then we can go to Favorites. Once we've set that, save this as whatever kind of name that we want to give this. Doesn't matter what you call it here, but just so you'll be able to access it. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a name, and I'm going to save it. So now the next time that I come into the history browser, I don't have to do much of anything probably other than just save or change my time period for the time period that I want to look at for this particular time. So I'll call up my report, I'll click on Load, and it will automatically generate the report with the criteria that I've already put in place from the last time I was in the history browser. So a lot of really powerful tools here, a lot of fun to play around with. I love showing people the history browser and trying to figure out different ways to use it for different types of questions that people have about the way the data is the way you can look at the data. So that's the history browser. Let's next then turn to turnover analysis. Now, we've talked so far in the history browser about how that works, and keep in mind all of it we've done here as well as what we'll do in special history reports and special library reports is actually historical. This is actually what's going on with the data. I want to point that out only because as we go into turnover analysis is more predictive in nature. It's based upon how our current assignment grid is rotating based on the categories that we have in place. So this is, again, predictions. This is speculative. This is not historical. But it can be hugely helpful in just giving us some baseline information about how the database is performing and how the database might perform if we make some changes. So we're going to go ahead now and I'll talk about the two different ways to get into turnover analysis. We can either from the menu at the top, double click on the circling blue arrows to get to turnover analysis. That's a double left mouse click. Or we can use the context menu, data set, analysis, and analysis. So let's go ahead and I'll double click on the menu at the top here. So double click, turnover analysis will pop up. Now what we see immediately, right off the bat, we see two sections of the screen. Now I'll point out again, this is predictions on how our categories are rotating. When you look at this, this is based on the current active assignment grid and purely based upon songs and clock calls. This is not based upon any attribute rules, any rotation rules, anything that we might have in place in addition to just purely clock calls and songs. So that's important to point that out. This is, not the end-all, be-all. Obviously, this is a very, baseline indication of what's happening with the database. But it can be hugely helpful in just looking at, how the database is turning over, for example, right off the bat. And then we can do some speculative work down below here to talk about what might happen if we make changes. So the top portion of the screen here, we can click on the header tabs at the top to sort the list in any which way that we want. Just double click to sort it and change it. Also, we can right click over the grid up above here to add in or exclude certain columns of information. As you see now, I've kind of set this up with the information that I would most likely want to utilize as I'm looking at the turnover analysis. So I've got songs and slots here. I think it's important to talk about songs and slots really quickly if you're not aware of that. Slots can be packeted songs that are part of a three-song slot. Songs are the songs outside of themselves rotating without packets. So you may see in some of the columns in your data, you may see a difference in the song count as opposed to the slot count, and that is reflective of the songs that you have packeted. So just be aware of that. Average hour, basically what that's showing us here is obviously I'm playing 9 heart songs by average in each one of my active clock hours on this particular grid. Average spins per day, average spins per week, all pretty straightforward here. One of the neat things that we can go into turnover analysis and look at just on the fly, and this could be hugely helpful if we're making changes to our database. So we've added some songs or taken some songs out of the database, and we need to adjust our rules. we can go right into turnover analysis and look at the suggested minimum rest. MusicMaster Windows is going to give us, and this will dynamically change over the course of time as we change the library, but it will give us a suggested minimum or maximum rest that we can then take to our rule tree if we wish and use that as a guideline for what we decide to set that at, either in our existing database or as we're setting up a new database. So that can be a hugely helpful tool. And like I said, that will change over the course of time. So if I want to take any of these columns out or add any of these columns in, I can right-click and I can manipulate that in whichever manner that I wish. I can also go ahead and left-click and drag and move the order of this around. If I want to have average spins per day, average spins per week at the end of the list, all I have to do is left-click and drag this through and move this however I want. As I mentioned in our history browser portion of the webinar here, you can copy and paste this information if you wish. You want to copy it into a spreadsheet so your consultant can look it over, or you want to take it offline and look at it a little bit later on. Again, Windows copy, Windows paste, Control-C, Control-V to take it into a spreadsheet or somewhere else. So all you have to do is just click anywhere in that portion of the screen, copy and paste, and you're good to go. So just have that in the corner of your mind if you're looking at that in the future. Something else that I can do from this top portion of the screen is I can right-click with my mouse and get to a choice not only where I can exclude or include certain fields of information, I can toggle this from my current active assignment grid, which is currently what's showing, to an alternate grid that maybe I'm about to put in place, or a holiday grid, and look to see if there are any changes that I need to be aware of, or just look to see how this particular grid is going to perform based on the goals that I have in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle this to my alternate grid. I'm going to go ahead and click this now, and you'll see the hourglass will show up, and then my turnover analysis screen has adjusted. So it can be really helpful when you're making clock changes or making a new database or just doing wholesale work within your library. You could actually go through here and have your clock or clocks open, making changes to the clocks, going through making adjustments to your assignment grid, saving those changes, and then recalculating, which is the other choice that I have available here in turnover analysis, and immediately see how those changes that you've made to clocks or assignment grids might come into play. So that can be a huge, huge tool, like I said, as you're thinking about making changes to your database, or you're trying to figure out why the database is working a particular way. Down below, currently what we're looking at is a different graphical view of the portion above. As we click down through the different columns, you'll see that the column graph adjusts as we toggle through it. It's also giving us a speculative one-play look at a song in that category based on, again, the clock calls and the songs in the category, how that song is going to rotate over a period of time. And it's giving us the colored clocks here that were giving us the different quarter hours that the record is playing in. As an example here, I'm currently set on, let me turn this back to make sure that I'm on my main grid. Let me turn that back over here, and again, this will adjust. I'm looking at the fringe category. I've got 29 songs, 29 slots. They basically play once an hour. And down below, based again strictly on songs and slots, no other rotation rules or anything else, 1 day, 5-hour, shortest, longest mean turnover, roughly here is what's happening with the fringe category. It's also giving me the weekly spins, the daily spins, and the coolest thing about this portion of the screen is once I start going over to manipulate the actual number of records that I might decide I want to put into this category. So say, for example, I'm thinking about making a change to the fringe category. And I'm either going to take some records out because I want to get a different turnover. So I'm going to look at what's going to happen, again, just based on X number of records in the category. I'm going to go ahead and say, what happens if I take this up to 35 records? So I can click the toggle in slot count here and speculatively look at what's going to happen to this category if I take this up to 35 records. And you'll see the pattern obviously is going to change, and I may want to play upward or downward with this category, if I'm making a new category or making adjustments to it, to find that sweet spot in the list here. Maybe it's going to be 8 additional records. Maybe it's going to be less 8 records. And as we go through this, we're also looking at the turnover information. As you know, as I change this upward or downward, that's going to change as well. So additionally, originally I had this set at 29 records. I'm going to take it back to 29 records. And I'm pretty comfortable with this pattern so far, but maybe I can do better. And I'm thinking about adding a couple of extra records in. Say, for example, I'm just going to add in a couple of extra records. What is that going to do? If I take this from 29 to 31, what is this going to do to the way this category turns over? So I'm going to take this up to 31, and the pattern has adjusted. It doesn't look any worse or any better than it did previously. But one thing that's interesting to note here in the fringe category is the difference in the way the hour and the quarter hour exposure changes. And so we might want to play around with that a little bit further and find out what the sweet spot is. I think I have this on this is the grid that I wanted to actually show you here. The spins here set at 29 currently on my alternate grid, which gives me an hour exposure of 62.50 and then a quarter hour of 50%. If I take this up to 31, you'll see that that changes as well. So again, you can play around with this and find out what the best combination is for each individual category. So that's a huge tool, and a lot of times that's a great way to kind of figure out what's going to happen to a category. Other things in the turnover analysis that are really helpful tools. Say, for example, you're looking at a category that just has a very few records in them. You don't have a lot of rules on them, and you're wondering, well, why isn't it rotating the way that it should? It should just be going, 1 through 7, 1 through 9, without, any kind of impedance on it. And I think that I have one clock call of it every single hour for every single day. You can go into your turnover analysis and actually look to see if that is in fact correct. Now, in this fringe category, I know that I have, or I don't know at this point, that I have some uneven clock calls. I'm going to go ahead and click on the icon here for format clock usage, and that's going to show me that, lo and behold, for the 8 to midnight hours on this particular grid, not am I using just one, like I thought I was, I'm actually using 2. So it's a real fast way to go in an active grid or an inactive grid and figure out for each individual category how many calls I'm actually using of that particular category. So that can be a helpful tool. If I decide that I want to put auto burn in place, or I have auto burn in place, just as a little review for folks that maybe aren't familiar with what auto burn is, if I'm running syndication overnight and I'm not keeping a consistent rotational pattern, and say I have 1 or 2 records that are not going to play based upon that syndicated program, and I want to make sure that I keep a consistent pattern, I may want to use the auto burn and burn a couple of records in each one of those hours overnight. If I do that and I put those in place, say for example I put in 2 overnight in a couple of these hours, I go through each one and I'm going to say I'm going to burn 2 of these Monday through Sunday, and then I go ahead and click OK, this will immediately recalculate, and you'll notice that my map down below will change as well. So that can also give you some good speculative tools as well. Finally, turnover calculator. If I'm about to build a brand new category and I know I have X number of records that I have available to me and I want to get a particular turnover, I can go into the turnover calculator and I can give myself a real quick thumbnail sketch of what I'm actually going to need and if I'm on track with this. So say, for example, if I'm looking for a 1-day, 5-hour turnover for a particular category that I'm thinking about creating, and I'm going to play 2 records an hour from that category. So I'll go ahead and put that in place. How many records am I going to need? I'm not really sure to get that turnover and have that many clock calls. The turnover calculator, if I click on calculator, will then tell me right off the bat, well, you're going to need 58 records if you want to do that and get that turnover. So, and you can reverse this any which way you want to, play around with average per hour, average turnover, and get a lot of really helpful information from that. So that's the turnover analysis. And I want to just briefly now spend some time looking at the special history reports and special library reports. And again, any questions that you have about anything that you've seen here today, we definitely encourage you to get with your music scheduling consultant to delve into more depth here about history browser, turnover analysis, special history, or special library. So now let's turn to special history reports. Special history reports can be accessed from the context menu at Dataset, Analysis, and Special History Reports. And there's a couple of different reports here that I want to just highlight on really briefly here so you can see what's available to you. Say, for example, you want to see all the play instances of an artist and their individual songs, along with the spin information and dates for each instance, a historical list. We can do that by generating our artist title analysis. Now, this, again, is very much like the history browser. We have a date range that we put in, so date and hour range that we put in. We'll adjust this to the hours that we want to look at. So I'm going to look at midnight to 11 p.m. And I'm going to do an artist title analysis for a very small defined period here. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick a couple of categories. And I'm again going to focus on our date range here of the 19th through the 25th. And we're going to go through here and click on that. And so we're going to do a 7-day period for just the heart, the soul, and the novelty category. Actually, I'll take out and just do heart and soul because those are our core categories. And then we're going to go to the Options tab. Now, the most important thing to talk about in most of the special history reports is the critical nature of defining the options field, and very specifically the artist name and the song title field. Most times when you go in here for the first time, the drop-down boxes here in song field, artist name, song title, and you'll see variations of this in some of the other reports we'll look at here in just a second, are not filled in. And it will be critical when you generate the report that you actually use the drop-down box to assign the fields for each one of these templates. So for song title, obviously it's going to be title. For artist name, it's going to be artist. So let's go back to report setup and click print and generate this report. It also might be important to note at this point here, if we click print, you'll see as this comes up on my computer that it's actually, looks like it might actually going to be sending directly to my printer at this point. What's actually going to happen is it's going to give me a print preview box in most cases that will allow me to look at this in preview mode and then decide if I do want to commit to sending it to paper. In this particular instance, in the upper left-hand corner, you see a print. So if I click on print, it will give me the option of printing this to paper. But oftentimes, the printer dialog box will come up. That will show you a preview then, and then you can print from there. If you want to disable that functionality, you can do that as well. So it will always just print. So here is an artist report by title with the days and spins of all that artist. So again, if we're looking to generate a type of report for our consultants, for a record label, artist title analysis is going to be a great way to do that in special history reports. How about, for example, if we want to do a summary of spins and the turnovers for selected categories for a date range? We can do that as well in the special history reports. Again, it's data set analysis and special history reports. And I'm going to, this time, go to category turnover analysis. And I'm going to, again, just pick a very small time period. And I'm going to pick the 19th through the 25th of February. And I'm going to go ahead and just pick a couple of categories. And I'm going to make sure that I've defined any options tabs. Even if there are not anything to necessarily define here, it's always a good idea to go in and make sure that they're defined correctly. And then go ahead and click OK. So then I'm going to go ahead and click print. And I'm going to wait a couple of seconds here for the report to generate. And this is an actual, and this looks a little bit like what we saw in the turnover analysis, with the difference being that this is an actual historical view of the categories, songs played, the turnovers, as opposed to the theoretical predictive view that we're seeing in turnover analysis. So this is probably the best place to go to generate that sort of real-time running category turnover analysis. Again, and that is in special history reports. And then finally, the the question that everybody always asks us, at least once or twice a week, someone will get a call needing to do an ASCAP BMI report. And we've made it really simple for you in MusicMaster Windows. It's data set analysis. Again, it's under special history reports. And it's going to be an ASCAP BMI report. And as you see, as you scroll down through here, not only will you see reports for FMQB and radio and records, you'll also see lots of interesting country-specific content reports. So if you're in one of those countries where you've got to generate one of those reports, we've already defined the report for you, put it into the format that the licensing agency wants it in. So all you've got to do is select it, and then the most critical part is, again, to just go to the Options tab, define your time period. I'm going to define this again. I know it's usually, I think it's a 2-week or a 30-day period, but let's go ahead and say for the ASCAP BMI here, we're going to go ahead and just do the 25th, 19th through the 25th, and we're only going to look at music categories, and we're going to make sure that we define the artist and the song title. Now, I'm not going to actually generate this particular report per se for you. It's going to print, but it's actually going to print what they call an EMR report, which is electronic music report, which then can be uploaded to ASCAP BMI. You can certainly open this and look at it if you wish, and try to make heads or tails of it. But basically, the biggest thing to know is that's already been formatted for the regulatory agencies. All you've got to do is either send it to them in email or upload it to their websites in whatever manner they've specified that you're to do that. Finally, I want to talk about special library reports, data set, analysis, and special library reports. Now, there's 4 different reports in here. They're pretty straightforward as far as most of the other ones. I just want to highlight on one here, and then I definitely want to toss this back over to Joe because he's got a lot of cool things to show us. Category move history, self-explanatory. Category spins analysis. I think that's straightforward. Weeks in category. If we want to run a report for how long a particular song has been in a category, we can use that. I'm going to show you AirPlay Affidavit here in just a moment. I want to point out the Report Designer box. We've already, again, done most of the formatting work for you, but the cool thing in special library reports is that we can actually go through and change this out and make the report look different, add different fields to it, and customize it to our own liking. But let's just talk finally then about AirPlay Affidavit. So say Budweiser wants us to give us a proof of, give them a proof of performance for the last 2 weeks of promos that we've been running for them. We can do that with our AirPlay Affidavit. I'm going to go ahead and click on my promo category, and I'm just going to go for simplicity's sake here of looking at today. So I'm going to go ahead and February 25th through February 25th, and I'm going to generate the affidavit and show you how cool this looks and the fact that you really don't have to do too much else. I will point out that if you decide you want to use AirPlay Affidavit, you'll need to have your music scheduling consultant get a currency field added for you in your database under Data Set Library Fields if you don't already have one. That's a simple thing for us to do. Then you can go into your library maintenance and for the promo, add a dollar value for the airtime, and then when you generate the report, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now for promos for just today, click on Print, and you'll see the print preview box comes up. I can ignore that. And it's going to generate now a promo report. I've generated a report for all of the promos that I have in the database. This will just take a second. I only have 3 of them in this particular database, but I've got a Bank of America sponsorship for We Pay Your Bills, a Shooter's Bar and Grill, and a Warner Brother Records weekend record promo. And it's giving me each instance of the play, and it's also telling me the cumulative value of those mentions on the air. So then I can give that to the business manager or the advertiser or the account executive, print that off, and there is the actual proof of performance via MusicMaster for those non-music promos. And that's turnover analysis, history browser, special library reports, and special history reports. A lot of stuff to cover here. Again, if there are additional questions that you have, feel free to contact any of us at any time. We'd be glad to help and talk about your specific instances that you're working with in your database. With that, I want to thank you for your time and your attention and hand things back over to Mark Bolke.
Thank you very much.